Muchachos y muchachas, day 3 of the Ghislaine Maxwell trial, and we continue off on the Jane testimony. This is the alleged victim of Jeffrey Epstein, as well as Ghislaine Maxwell. Especially for this trial, it is Ghislaine Maxwell that is more in focus. But nonetheless, there are definite details from Jeffrey Epstein's doings within this trial. Now, yesterday we left off from the testimony from Larry Vysotsky, who was the personal pilot of Jeffrey Epstein, and we began this testimony with Jane and continued on today. If you guys need to catch up, I did a day 1 and day 2 video. You guys can always go back and get that information. So with that being said, Jane continues to testify, as well as her ex-boyfriend, who also corroborates some details that are likely, as well as a famed exec from the Interlochen School of Fine Arts, the kids camp that is alleged in the trials. Stay right there. We're going to go through it. A new study is highlighting some important facts about our wrinkles. In this study, women were asked how their mood would change if they looked younger. 31% of these women said that they would feel more confident, while 15% said that they would feel more like themselves. 11% said they feel more relaxed, while 9% said they'd be happier. Our confidence is directly tied to our appearance. Unfortunately, wrinkles and sagging skin can hold us back from reaching the true happiness we deserve. This is why I highly recommend Glow with Natly. I couldn't believe how effective this rejuvenating serum really was when I first started using it. Within no time, my skin felt smoother and firmer. It also helps reduce the appearance of visible signs of aging like sagging skin, crow's feet, and more. It's the only anti-aging serum that I've ever used that truly works for me. More importantly, if you don't see results in as little as 7 days, you can get a full refund. If you want to help restoring your youthful glow, you'll love Glow with Natly. Get up to 38% for the next 24 hours by going to glowwithnatly.com or by clicking the link in the description below. All right, now that we're back, let's jump straight into Ghislaine Maxwell trial day 3. There's a lot of information to cover, as well as some cross-reference sourcing from some previously reported things that have a lot to do with what we're going to talk about and what was testified today. What I'm going to do as a tactic, as I did yesterday, I'm going to recap certain sections, and then I'm going to cross-reference it with a play-by-play transcript, as well as other reference it with another article as well, just to make sure that we're corroborating the same evidence, the same testimonies, the same people, all of that. So let's get started. There's a lot to cover. We're going to start off with this. Maxwell's brother, Kevin, in court today. Kevin Maxwell was spotted seated in the courtroom today. One of Ghislaine's sisters, Isabel, was also present for the proceedings. Ghislaine's 3 sisters and 3 brothers have been supportive of her, even petitioning the United Nations, as I've covered before, to get her out on bail. The siblings were raised in luxury, the children of publishing tycoon Robert Maxwell and his French-born wife, Elizabeth, a Holocaust scholar. So, with this piece of information, I'm actually going to show you a video of, I believe this is Kevin, her brother. This is after the trial, but I think it's relevant to this little section here, and I'll tell you why.
Guys, what I'd like to say is, first of all, thank you for giving us this opportunity to speak with you. I'm very pleased to be in New York, and I'm very pleased to have attended today in court in person together with Isabel in support of our sister, Ghislaine. Personally, it was gave me a tremendous sense of relief to be close to her, to be able to actually see her in the flesh, even to be able to speak with her, because the U.S. Marshals who allowed us to talk to her. And that's the first time that I've spoken to her in person in over 500 days since her pre-trial detention started. And to see her looking pretty well, notwithstanding the conditions of detention, which are now the subject of a formal complaint to the United Nations Committee on Arbitrary Detention. We respect the criminal justice system and process in this country, and as a result, we are not going to make any further comments whilst he's pending court, and we won't be answering any further questions. That's out of respect for the process, and I'm very grateful if you can respect that. Thank you very much.
All right, so let's recap what he just said. So Ghislaine Maxwell's brother, Kevin Maxwell, says, so there's Kevin, he was relieved to see her in person and speak with her for the first time in more than 500 days at her trial on Wednesday. The reason why I bring this up and I start off with this is because there has been a lot of speculation because this is a federal trial. There's not televised live streaming. There's no photos of hers, despite just one of her very, very close up from prison with a black eye. And a lot of speculation has gone out about this, about, you know, her not being real. She's not really there and all these things. Now, make of it what you will. Kevin actually testifying that he's actually seen her. He's spoken to her from over 500 days. I don't know if that offers any sort of insight to you, but for me, I thought that I would share that with you. So let's go ahead and get into the first cross-examinations. So Maxwell's attorney grills accuser. Defense attorney Laura Menninger is attempting to poke holes in Jane's claims that she was from a poor, broken family when Epstein and Maxwell allegedly began preying on her in 1994. The woman testified yesterday that her family fell into bankruptcy after her dad died of leukemia, and she lived in a pool house with her mom and siblings when she got drawn into Epstein's orbit at about 14 years old. And there's more of her testimony. And again, if you guys want to learn about her testimony, I went over that to a lot of extent yesterday. So you can go back a video, and I actually have been covering this trial for the past 2 days. So go back on 2 videos if you have to absolutely catch up. So first time with Ghislaine. Defense attorney Laura Menninger is challenging Jane over her testimony yesterday regarding the first time she saw Maxwell without her clothes on. The alleged victim said that shortly after she was first abused by Jeffrey Epstein at the age of 14, he and Maxwell led her to his bedroom inside his Palm Beach mansion, moved her over to the bed, and took her clothes off. When questioning Jane this morning, Menninger said that in December of 2019, you told the government that you do not have a specific memory of your first time with Ghislaine. You have to come up with that memory in the last 2 years, correct? She asked. And then Jane replied, I don't believe I've come up with a memory. No, the witness answered. All right, so let's start there. Let's go into some transcripts because there is more information that I do want to include because there's a lot more, revelations in all this. So let's go straight to the transcripts and let's start there. So scrolling down to, I believe, the most important part right here. Here it goes. Menninger, yesterday it was said shortly after this pool house that you had this incident with Epstein and Ghislaine, right? Attorney USA objected, said objection as to form. And Judge Nathan presided, specify what you're talking about. And then Attorney USA said objection. And Menninger said, this is foundational. Menninger then proceeds. You told me the government you told the government that you do not have a specific memory of your first time with Ghislaine. And then another objection. Menninger then says, you have to come up with a memory in the last 2 years. Jane said, I don't believe I've come up with a memory. No. Continued on. Accuser Jane says it is not typed up right on this form. Maxwell's lawyer, Menninger, who, by the way, Menninger is defending Maxwell, another typo by the government. AUSA says, objection. Menninger says, you told the government Ghislaine never used sex toys or a vibrator on you, correct? And Jane said, correct. And then again, Menninger goes in and went to ask if Ghislaine ever saw her perform oral sex. He went on to ask Jane if Ghislaine ever saw her, if she ever saw Jane, the accuser, perform oral sex on Epstein. No was the answer. Hand job, no. Intercourse, no. No, we're not going blow by blow for this portion. Menninger, says the inner city press journalist Matthew Russell. Menninger then continues and says, look at 39-008 at page 5. Does this refresh your recollection? And Jane says, no. Menninger then says, or asks, you said Ghislaine never saw you perform oral sex on Epstein. Jane said, I don't recall. Menninger then says, look at the document. Judge Nathan says, let's take a break. So then there was a break in this coverage. Now let's go to the next recap here. All right. I actually wanted to come to this this small little portion here that's recapped by the New York Times. And again, this is the New York Times, right? So they have known to be biased. They have known to lean a certain way. So I find the coverage very interesting that there is some corroboration between an independent journalist transcribing this, the New York Post, and then now the New York Times. So here we go. There was a claim. A defense lawyer uses The Lion King to trip up Ghislaine Maxwell accuser on the stand. A trip to New York to see The Lion King on Broadway was at the center of a sharp exchange on court on Wednesday as the lawyer defending Ghislaine Maxwell against sex trafficking charges tried to chip away at the testimony of a woman who says she was sexually abused by Jeffrey Epstein and Miss Maxwell when she was a teenager. The woman, identified only as Jane in the trial, had once told investigators that Mr. Epstein flew her to New York in his private jet to see The Lion King on Broadway in 1994 when she was 14 years old. By then, according to a vivid account, Jane testified on Tuesday that Mr. Epstein and his longtime companion, Miss Maxwell, had already pulled her into a pattern of persistent sexual abuse. Miss Maxwell, lawyer Laura Menninger, pounced on the 1994 date. The Lion King did not come out until 1997, ? Says Miss Menninger, asked to Jane, the witness. Questioned at length, Jane testified that she had been incorrect in my timeline. The exchange was emblematic of the defense's attempt to undercut the testimony of the first of the four accusers in the government is expected to testify during the trial in the federal district court in Manhattan. Now, I find this very interesting that the New York Times is actually saying within their own observable bias in writing this and transcribing the trial that the defense attorney for Maxwell is emblematic in trying to undercut, that's a very specific word here, undercut the testimony of the first of the four accusers in the government, meaning that the New York Times observes it as well, that there is some sort of tactic by the defense team of Maxwell to try to undermine her testimony and try to probe holes and try to, elaborate on those little gaps. I'm just mentioning that because I find it very interesting that the New York Times they're actually reporting this correct. They're actually corroborating between three different sources as we're going through. Now, going back to the recap by the New York Post, first time with Ghislaine. Defense attorney Laura Menninger is challenging Jane over her testimony yesterday regarding the first time she saw Maxwell without her clothes. The alleged victim said that shortly after she was abused by Jeffrey Epstein at the age of 14, he and Maxwell led her to his bedroom inside his Palm Beach mansion, moved her over to the bed, and took her clothes off. When questioning Jane this morning, Menninger said that December 2019, you told the government you do not have a specific memory with your first time with Ghislaine. You have come up with that memory in the last 2 years, correct? And then Jane replied, I don't believe I've come up with that memory. No. Continued on. Accuser says Epstein introduced her to Trump. This is a very interesting part of the testimony. The first alleged victim to testify at the Ghislaine Maxwell trial said today that Jeffrey Epstein took her to Mar-a-Lago in the 90s when she was a teenager to meet Donald Trump. The woman, identified as the pseudonym Jane, said Epstein drove her to Trump's Palm Beach estate in a dark green car when she was just 14 in 1994. She wasn't asked to describe the meeting, and defense attorney Laura Menninger then moved on an unrelated line of questioning. Let me repeat that. She wasn't asked to describe the meeting, and defense attorney Laura Menninger, who is defending Maxwell, moved on to an unrelated line of questioning. Now, there's a reason why I am honing in on this, okay? Let me now read the portion from the New York Times. This is the part where they describe this piece of the testimony. The defense also asked, once again, elicited testimony about the celebrities in the orbit of Mr. Epstein and Miss Maxwell. On the witness stand, Jane said Mr. Epstein had taken her to Donald J. Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida in the 1990s when she said she met Mr. Trump. Now I'm going to read just a little bit of the next line. Ms. Menninger began the cross-examination on Wednesday by asking Jane what she had told family members about her initial meeting with Epstein while she was away at summer camp in Michigan in 1994. And then it just goes on about Ghislaine and Epstein. And Ghislaine and Jane. But the reason why I mentioned this in two different sources is because you guys have to understand the New York Times has always weaponized their pieces. You know, they've gotten in a lot of litigation trouble, a lot of defamation suits for always wrongly defaming and slandering a particularities in a person's character. You've seen this happen very recently, and they've always done this against Trump. Now, you would think if there was something to hone in on and to scope in on, that they would do it, especially for Donald J. Trump. They have always weaponized their reporting, their stories. They've tried to spin things against Trump. Why not this time? Why is it only this little piece of paragraph that, you know, in the 90s, he drove her to meet Donald J. Trump? Why is there nothing more than that when they are known to weaponize this very narrative against Trump? You would think that because they own the establishment media, that they would especially weaponize this piece, and yet they haven't. Why isn't that? I don't know, but I just wanted to make sure that you guys catch that too, that although Trump is implicated in as an individual in the case, there is no specification as to any abuse or, you know, any sort of specificities or you know, specific details. And they just move on. There's nothing more. They don't even link it to another article or another piece or anything like that. You would think that they would, because there's definitely other, you know, said, like right here, like there's other links to other articles, but yet, of course, the New York Post hasn't, the New York Times hasn't. Why is that? I don't know. Let's go to the next one. So, moving on, let's go to the next piece of recap. Accuser said she flew with Prince Andrew. Jane, who alleges she was repeatedly abused by Epstein and Maxwell when she was a teenager in the 1990s, testified today that she remembered Prince Andrew being on flights with her. The Duke of York has been under fire for his close ties with the late pedophile and also facing a lawsuit from Virginia Roberts Giuffre, who claims Epstein and Maxwell made her have sex with the UK royal 3 times starting in 2001 when she was 17. Giuffre's claims are not part of Maxwell's ongoing federal sex trafficking trial. Now, again, this goes into, even as short as this recap is, there's a mention of Prince Andrew, but then there's also that detail. She was alleged to Virginia Roberts Giuffre was alleged to been forced to have sex with Prince Andrew. There is no other mention with all the other players quite yet with Donald Trump, as we just went through. But whenever there is someone else who is of question, there is very specific detail and allegations. Just wanted to make sure that people knew that as well. All right, so then they took a lunch break. They came back. Right before the break, manager was grilling Jane about multi-million-dollar payout she received from the Jeffrey Epstein Victim Compensation Fund. And then it says, Jane says she's saying happy birthday to Mike Wallace. One of Ghislaine Maxwell's accusers testified that Jeffrey Epstein bought her famed journalist Mike Wallace's 80th birthday party in New York. I sang happy birthday, said Jane, who would have been about 15 at the time. The acclaimed CBS 60 Minutes correspondent, who died in 2012, appears to be one of the slew of celebrities who hobnobbed with Epstein at one time. And we're going to go through transcripts as well. Maxwell's defense attorney quizzed Jane over her client's accusers about the many plot lines that she has acted out over the decades as a soap opera star. They included being bullied, battling cancer, these are roles that she's played, surviving a car crash, getting stalked by a serial killer, and taking down a Mexican drug cartel. Not my favorite storyline, Jane told Laura Menninger when she was asked about playing a prostitute. You're able to cry on command, Menninger prodded. Who is defending Maxwell, to remind you, to which the witness replied, not really. Jane later told Assistant U.S. Attorney Allison Moe that acting on television is not real, while testifying in court is. So let's go to some of these transcripts as written by the independent journalist who is transcribing word for word as best as he can in this trial. Okay, so starting here at the very top. So you went to specialized entertainment school, right? Menninger then continues. And since you have played roles like a cancer patient, Jane says yes. Menninger then says prostitute. Jane says no. And Menninger says you cry on command. Menninger then says, your accusations in the case include that you were 14 when you were abused, right? Jane says yes. Menninger then says, but you were first told the government you were 13, right? And Jane says, I might have said 13 going on 14. It's a small technicality. So you can see here how Menninger is trying to poke holes through all the stories. And then it says here, no, on prostitute, Jane said, not my favorite role. Menninger then tries to prod another hole. You talk about the Lion King and you say you were 14, but it only came out when you were 17, right? And you said you were 15 when you met Mike Wallace, his 80th birthday party, right? And Jane says, I don't know how old I was. Menninger says, you don't know when his birthday is? Look at J33. Does it refresh your recollection? And then Attorney USA in the prosecution team objection. Judge Nathan presides, sustains, no basis for refreshing. Menninger then continues, in your civil case, you got interrogatories. Do you know what those are? And Jane says no. Menninger then says, so your lawyer answered for you under oath and you didn't know? And Jane says, I don't know. Cross-examination of Jane peters out with a final exhibit admitted. Unclear how press and public will get it. Now redirect. Attorney USA then says, did any of the prosecutors ever tell you what to say in this trial? And Jane says, no. So at this point, I think that the prosecution team, Attorney USA, is trying to clarify from the last cross-examination in which Menninger was trying to say, trying to make out, in my opinion, it looks like she was trying to make out, so your attorneys said something on your behalf and you didn't know what that was. And Jane was just like, I don't know. So it looks like Attorney USA, who's on the prosecution team, is trying to clarify this object here and just make it known that, did the prosecutors ever tell you what to say in this trial? And she's like, no. So then Attorney USA continues the examination. You were asked about notes of meetings with the U.S. Did you speak about everything all at once? Jane says, no, it's too difficult emotionally on every level. Then Attorney USA says, then there were fewer of us in the room. Do you know why? And Jane says, to make me more comfortable. Attorney USA then goes into, why did you speak to the tabloid reporter? And Jane says, he basically blackmailed me. He said he would publish unredacted documents. And Judge Nathan says, this is not for the truth of the matter asserted, but impact on the listener. Attorney USA says, did you make an agreement with the reporter? And Jane says, yes. I talk about the meeting with Jeffrey Epstein. The reporter would keep my name out of it. I was working on a TV show. Attorney USA then continues, do you know the difference between acting on television and testifying in court? And Jane says, yes, this is real. I'm seeking closure. I have been running from this my entire life. I want to help in whatever way I can and maybe find some healing. By the end, Jane is sobbing, as Matthew Russell notes. Jane says no. Oh, I'm sorry. Attorney USA asks, do you have any financial interest in this trial? And Jane says no. Attorney USA says nothing further. Judge Nathan then presides. Jane, you may step down and we'll take a break. Jurors, your snacks are all here. Clerk says all rise, and the thread will continue. So this is where we move on with the recap. All right. So going back onto the recap, Jane breaks down on stand. So as we just left the right before break, it said, the first alleged victim to testify against Ghislaine Maxwell at her sex trafficking trial cried when she was asked about being awarded $5 million from the Jeffrey Epstein Victim Compensation Fund. The accuser, identified by the pseudonym Jane, paused for about 30 seconds and wiped tears from her eyes with a tissue after she was asked by a prosecutor to describe what the cash meant to her. I wish I would have never received that money in the first place because of what happened, Jane responded, in her voice breaking. Now, let's continue on. The next witness being Jane's ex-boyfriend. This is the witness's ex-boyfriend. His name is Matt. A fellow actor identified by the student as Matt has now taken the stand. He's testifying about Jane. One of Maxwell's accusers told him about her relationship with Epstein. Matt described his girlfriend of 8 years as shaken, embarrassed, horrified when she discussed her relationship with the pedophile. She would say, Matt, the money wasn't effing free, but didn't go into more detail, he said. So let's go to the transcripts. Attorney USA Mo, how do you know Jane? Matt says she's my ex-girlfriend from 2006 to 2014. Attorney USA then asks, did you live together? And Matt says yes, from 2007 to 2014. Attorney USA says, are you still friends? And Matt says, yes, we work on the same TV show. Attorney USA proceeds. What did Jane tell you about her home life? Maxwell's lawyer says objection. Maxwell's lawyer objects. Judge Nathan says any foundation. Maxwell's lawyer says it's hearsay. So then they go to sidebar. They return. Judge Nathan says, Ms. Mo, I'll ask you to narrow the question. Attorney USA Mo then continues. Did Jane speak about her family finance when she grew up? Matt said yes. When her father got sick, they went broke. Her mother was working a small job. They were in the same bed. Matt then continues, they told me that they had a godfather. Later, she told me that it was Jeffrey Epstein. I said, he'd help you pay your bills? She said, yes. Attorney USA, when did she tell you she met Epstein? Maxwell's lawyer, objection. And then Judge Nathan replies, ask more specific questions. Attorney Mo then asks, did Jane tell you what happened between her and Jeffrey Epstein? Matt said not specifically. Attorney Mo, or Attorney USA Mo said, did she say why he gave her money? And Matt said, she just said it was not free. Attorney USA Mo said, did they tell you about the women who were involved? And Matt said yes, or who was involved, and he said yes. Attorney USA then asks, did she give the woman's name? And Matt said no. What was her demeanor like when Jane told you about Jeffrey Epstein? Matt said shame. Attorney USA then goes in. What did Jane tell her mother? Matt said the money was not free. That Attorney USA then interjects and says, don't say what the mother said, just say what Jane said. And then Matt then replies, Jane told her mother that the money was not free and that it should not have been allowed. Attorney USA Mode said, did you learn Ghislaine Maxwell was arrested? Matt said, yes. On the news, I asked Jane, is that the woman that you told me about? And she said, yes. And then Attorney USA concludes no further questions. Then Maxwell's lawyer says no cross. The next witness, Daniel Vesselman of the Interlochen. Let's go to the recap. So the recap then says, Daniel Vesselman, the VP of the finance at the Interlochen Center for Arts, is now testifying about the organization's summer camp, which one of Maxwell's accusers attended. Jane testified earlier that she first met Maxwell and Epstein in 1994 at the Elite Arts Camp, where she was for the summer between 7th and 8th grade. The late pedophile financier was a big donor to the institution, bankrolling the Jeffrey Epstein scholarship log, and we're going to get into some of that detail as well, on its campus. The prestigious boarding school, which counts Joel Josh Groban or Jones amongst its alumni, has previously said it stripped Epstein's name from the lodge and cut ties with him after learning of his 2008 child prostitution conviction. All right. All right, let's go to the transcript here. Attorney USA then asks, where is Interlochen, Michigan? Vesselman, who was the executive to the Interlochen School, says near Traverse City. Attorney USA continues, how did you keep fundraising records? And Vesselman replies, Salesforce. Attorney USA says, we offer GX744 under seal, now GX741. Vesselson is the way to pronounce it. Sorry. A letter from Mr. Epstein about the scholarship lodge, how much he'd give. And the Attorney USA asks, what's this? And Vesselson says, the lodge formerly known as the Jeffrey Epstein Scholarship Lodge. Continued. Now it's 4:59. Cross-examination starts. Maxwell's lawyer, you don't have records for the individual and the individual's siblings, correct? Vesselson replied, correct. Maxwell's lawyer, Mr. Epstein, certainly was a major donor, correct? And 𝘏𝘂𝘮 said yes. And with that, 𝘏𝘂𝘮 is done. Judge Nathan then presides. Sorry, we're 2 minutes late. Have a good night. Clerk says all rise. And so that is the conclusion. And I'm going to imagine that 𝘏𝘂𝘮 will continue on their testimony tomorrow in day 4 of the Maxwell trial. Now, although that is the transcript is completed, there is some more juicy details on this. And I wanted to present that to you right here. So here it is with the donations and the affiliation with Interlochen. So then it reads, Laidlaw, I'm sorry, let's go back a little bit. Epstein also counted himself as an alumnus. Catherine Laidlaw, Interlochen's vice president of strategic communications and engagement, told the Daily Beast he attended Interlochen's national music camp in 1967. His course of study was bassoon orchestra, radio, and that Laidlaw said. Laidlaw said Epstein no longer was an Interlochen donor, and that his last gift to the school was in 2003. After the administration learned of his conviction, Interlochen discontinued contact with Epstein and removed all donor recognition with his name. Laidlaw said in an email referring to Epstein's 2007 plea to soliciting underage girls in Florida. So she continues that she said Interlochen has no record or any complaint lodged against Epstein at the school's policies would not have permitted Mr. Epstein under any unsupervised access to students. According to records reviewed by the Daily Beast, Epstein not only funded the Scholarship Lodge, but hosted events for Interlochen alumni at his New York office in his 7-story townhouse, which was raided over by the feds over the weekend, which was back in 2019. It also where Epstein is accused of forcibly raping a 15-year-old girl in 2002, Jennifer Araoz, who is now 32 and came forward. Continued on. The mother of soap opera actress Natly Denise came to Epstein, claimed that Epstein targeted her daughter when she was 13 years old at the Interlochen in 1994. She was at a school at the famed Interlochen Music Center in Michigan when she met Epstein. 𝘱𝘰𝘵𝘀𝘀 told the Daily Mail in 2011, adding, "My daughter was 13, but everyone thought she was 9 or 10. 𝘱𝘰 said that she believed Natly was an easy target over Epstein because the girl's father, classical conductor 𝘱𝘰𝘵𝘀𝘀, died 1 year before. Epstein was a big donor and heard about Natly and that her father had died, so she was vulnerable and contacted her, he said. Here's my number, 𝘱𝘰 said, according to the Daily Mail. Asked about 𝘱𝘰's claims, Laidlaw said, I can verify that Natly Denise is an alumna of the Interlochen Arts Camp. We have no information about the events that had been reported in this article. As stated, we have no record of any complaint raised against Mr. Epstein at Interlochen. 𝘱𝘰, Natly, and her mother did not return messages left by the Daily Beast. 2 of Epstein's attorneys did not return requests for comment. 𝘱𝘰 said Maxwell got to know her and Natly and tried to set up a meeting with Natly and Epstein, who wanted to mentor her. I trusted Ghislaine. She was like a mother. She was always calling my house, 𝘱𝘰 told the British tabloid. But 𝘱𝘰 said she wouldn't let Natly get involved with Epstein. What sort of a man approaches a young girl to meet her? Asks to meet her, 𝘱𝘰 told the tabloid. Ghislaine didn't want me to meet Epstein, but I did anyway and asked what he wanted with Natly, the mother said, and he said he wanted to help her singing career. He said, I'd like to be like a godfather. It felt creepy. I kept Natly away from him. She never met him alone. She never went anywhere with him. Epstein has long billed himself as a philanthropist to the arts, science, and education. And there is other additional information about that. I'm going to skip down to here. Epstein issue press releases on his largesse. This gives all of where he donated to as far as the arts and the sciences. But well before Epstein issued press releases on his largesse, he was listed as a donor at Interlochen School newsletters from 1990 to 1999, 9 years. Laidlaw says Epstein's life giving to the institution was less than $500,000. Okay, let's skip down. In February of 1992, Epstein hosted a pre-concert reception on Interlocken's behalf at the Degas Room of New York's then Radisson-owned Empire Hotel. Further documentation notes that Mr. Epstein himself did not attend the event, although he contributed funds to support it, Laidlaw noted in an email. In 1994, his funding for the Scholarship Lodge, which was an article noted was stationed close to a junior girls' camp. So he funded a scholarship lodge. We'll get more information here. The Jeffrey Epstein Scholarship Lodge is nearing completion as the newest rental unit on campus located at the Penn Colony Road next to Frolic Lodge near Junior Girls Camp. The Epstein Lodge is a gift to the center from Jeffrey Epstein, a businessman from New York and a former Interlochen camper, the Interlochen newsletter said. Proceeds from the rental unit will go to scholarship fund, providing ongoing monies for deserving students, the article continued. Timothy Ambrose, Interlochen's former vice president of institutional advancement, was quoted saying, "This will be the first construction of the handicap accessible housing on campus. We are extremely grateful that Jeffrey Epstein chose to demonstrate his commitment at Interlochen in such a profound and supportive way." Laidlaw told the Daily Beast that Interlochen records show that Epstein stayed at his lodge for a week in August of 2000. Per the funding agreement, he was permitted to use the lodge for up to 2 weeks per year. Interlochen has no record of any other use by him beyond that 1 week in August 2000, Laidlaw said in an email. The Daily Beast found one mention of Michigan in some of Epstein's flight records. Epstein and Maxwell, they traveled from New Jersey's Teterboro Airport to Traverse City, Michigan for a 5-day trip in August of 1998. They left Teterboro on August 7th and returned August 11th. The 25-year-old woman and fourth passenger, only identified by initials ET, joined them on the trip. Their return flight only included Maxwell, Epstein, and ET. Whether Epstein and his crew stayed at Interlochen during the trip is unknown. Meanwhile, Epstein hosted a reception at his New York mansion for the late CBS broadcaster and Interlochen alumnus Mike Wallace in 1997. Wallace's name was also listed in Epstein's address book with the title 60 Minutes CBS. Continued on. Held at the luxurious home of alumnus Jeffrey Epstein, the event included dinner, remarks from the Interlochen Alumni Organization President Dean Anderson and Wallace, plus entertainment by New York area alumni. Wallace was honored for his distinguished career in broadcasting and, coincidentally, his 79th birthday coming up during the festivities, can't say that, at Interlochen, the newsletter stated. Guests included CBS anchor Paula Zahn, along with Interlochen's former president Rich Odell and his wife, the board of trustee members Betsy Pafau, an alumna who attended the reception and wrote a blog post about it, said that Epstein allowed the gala's organizers to use 2 floors of his Manhattan townhouse. Continued on. So, Just to recap his stay at the lodge. Reached by the Daily Beast, Ambrose, the former Interlochen fundraising executive, said that the first courted Epstein as a donor at the Interlochen after someone had called him from New York, a New York number, asking to obtain concert tickets for a show in the 90s. Ambrose said he arranged a place for Epstein to stay a while attending the concert, and that he remembers most of his contact was with Maxwell. He could later get Epstein to fund a new log cabin on campus, which was the Epstein Scholarship Lodge. My recollection is that they came twice after the cabin was built, but quite frankly, Ghislaine was very protective. She was like a major domo for him. Ambrose told the Daily Beast, adding that when Epstein stayed at the Interlochen, he made sure he had a fresh orange juice and bottles of water stocked in the fridge. Continued on. Ambrose said that he didn't see Epstein on campus during his visits to 𝘱𝘍𝘍𝘐. He kept to his own schedule, Ambrose said. Let's say you had a major donor. You might say you don't want him to come over and have lunch with the president. Essentially, you would court them. But there wasn't really any of that. We didn't have any normal interaction. You would have it with a major donor, Ambrose told the Daily Beast. Other than that, he had tickets for the concerts. So listen to that piece. We didn't have normal interaction you would have with the major donor. Ambrose told the Daily Beast. Other than that, he had tickets for the concerts. So usually with major donors, the presidents would meet, they would greet, they were mingling, they were having lunch, they were having dinner, they were, having some sort of social gatherings. But with Epstein, he never did any of that. But he was sure to get concert tickets for shows that would happen at the school. And who were performing at these shows and concerts? You would imagine the kids, the girls. If I had to leave you with an impression, it was that he was generous to 𝘱𝘍𝘍𝘐, Ambrose told the Daily Beast. Obviously, there was nothing that portended that what happened later on. Our interactions were relatively normal in that respect. He was very generous to us. He was a private person, but so many comfortable, wealthy people. So I know that was a lot of information, but I felt that was very much needed to be explained, a part of that claim that he was a very philanthropic donor and that he donated a lot of money to this 𝘱𝘍𝘍𝘐 school. Now, what we learned from this article yesterday and today, actually, let me go back to it. This is what we learned yesterday, that this was near Traverse City. We nearly read a good bit of this today, but this was a short drive from the school along with 2 other passengers. And that Epstein apparently had another getaway in Michigan. There was a 66-year-old financier, his donation, to the school. And he bankrolled the Jeffrey Epstein Scholarship Lodge, which was his little lair on the campgrounds. So with that being said, it was a short, Traverse City was the destination city. It was the short drive to this kids camp where he had a cabin, a lair at. So with that being said, these were the donation activities. He was at the concerts where the kids performed. He was not intermingling with adults where usually they would with big donors like that. But then there is also testimony that he was acquiring some girls from the camp. So anyway, I know that, again, this is a longer sort of elaborated piece, but there's when there's juice like that and there's things that support what's being testified, I'm always going to present that. So anyway, with that, this is day 3, Ghislaine Maxwell trial. I hope you guys got a lot from it. Please continue to support me by liking this video, sharing it in your Telegram groups, Facebook groups, whatever groups, everywhere. Drop this link in whatever group you're socializing in, and just be sure to share this because I'm one of the few, if not the only, that is covering the Ghislaine Maxwell trial, and I will continue to plan to share this information with you guys day by day. I love you. Thank you for sharing your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for tipping me. There's a tipping section at the bottom. You can hit me up in different parts of those platforms. So I appreciate that. That's what keeps food on my table. And I will catch you guys in the next coverage. Bye-bye.